Rain fell in sheets over Millfield that morning, washing the small town in shades of gray, the kind of rain that seemed to carry omens, washing away footprints and secrets alike. At New Dawn Academy, the day began like any other, structured, regimented, with boys in matching uniforms moving silently through hallways under watchful eyes, until someone noticed that Ryan Cooper was missing from morning roll call. 3 years had passed since I released my documentary about Daniel Ward, the 12-year-old boy convicted of murdering his mother. 3 years since I'd exposed the corruption in Millfield's justice system and the disturbing influence of Eric Stevens, the church elder who had manipulated Julia Ward into abusing her son. 3 years of professional exile, my credibility questioned, my findings dismissed by those with the power to act. And now another boy was dead. I watched. The news report from my small apartment in New York, coffee growing cold in my hands. The reporter stood outside New Dawn Academy's imposing gates, rain plastering her hair to her forehead as she delivered the official statement. Authorities have confirmed that 15-year-old Ryan Cooper was found deceased in his room at New Dawn Academy early this morning. Initial reports suggest the death was self-inflicted. Academy Director Eric Stevens expressed deep sorrow at this tragic loss and assured parents that grief counselors will be available for all students. My phone rang. Marcus, my former assistant director, now working for a streaming service in Los Angeles. Helen, are you seeing this? His voice was urgent. New Dawn Academy. That's Stevens's place, right? Where they transferred Daniel. Yes. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen, where they were showing Ryan Cooper's school photo. A thin boy with hollow eyes and a forced smile. The same institution that supposedly rehabilitates troubled boys through spiritual guidance. There's something else, Marcus said. I still have contacts at Millfield PD. The security camera outside Ryan's room went out last night. Some kind of system failure. My skin prickled. For how long? 17 minutes, Helen, exactly 17 minutes. The same duration as the gap in the security footage the night Julia Ward was murdered. Not a coincidence. Not possible. Helen, are you still there? I was already opening my laptop, pulling up files I hadn't touched in years. I'm going back, Marcus. Back to Millfield? After everything that happened? They practically ran you out of town. This isn't random, I said, scrolling through old footage of Daniel at Westridge Detention Center. 17 minutes. The same. Signature. This is connected to Daniel's case. Helen, your documentary didn't change anything. Stevens is still there. The system is still protecting him. What makes you think? Because Daniel is still there too, I cut in. And now another boy is dead. After we hung up, I stood at my window, watching rain fall on a different city, 300 miles from Millfield. I'd tried to move on after the documentary, but the case had followed me like a shadow. The town that had closed ranks, the evidence that disappeared, the network that abandoned the project, the death threats that forced me to move, and Daniel Ward, now 15, still under the control of the man who had murdered his mother. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood froze. He won't be the last. The door closes at midnight. No one outside the case knew that phrase, the code words, for Julia Ward's abusive punishment of Daniel. Someone was reaching out. Someone inside New Dawn Academy was sending a warning. 3 years of silence had ended, and I knew with absolute certainty that if I didn't return to Millfield, Ryan Cooper would be only the first casualty in whatever game. Eric Stevens was playing now. The highway to Millfield stretched before me like a river of memories, each mile marker bringing back fragments of my last visit. My documentary, The Boy Without a Soul, the true story of Daniel Ward, had earned me both acclaim and contempt. Film festivals celebrated its unflinching exposure of corruption, while Millfield's power players labeled me a sensationalist hack, looking for fame at the expense of their town's reputation. In the end, neither reaction had mattered. Despite my evidence, despite the blood-stained shirt and witness testimony, no charges were ever filed against Eric Stevens. The state attorney general's office buried my report. The FBI deemed it a local matter. The national news organizations that initially expressed interest mysteriously went silent. Daniel remained at New Dawn Academy, transferred there from juvenile detention, through a program championed by Judge Reynolds himself. I had failed, and now another boy was dead. My phone rang again. Unknown caller. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. Silence. Then a young voice, barely audible. "Are you coming back?" My pulse quickened. Who is this? Someone who knows the truth. About Ryan. The voice was male, adolescent, trembling slightly. He didn't kill himself. How do you know that? Because he was happy. He told me yesterday that he'd found something important. Something that could help Daniel. A pause then. They're saying he left a note, but that's a lie. I was his roommate. There was no note. "What's your name?" I asked. "I can't say. They monitor our calls, but not during free period. I don't have much time." "How did you get my number?" "Daniel gave it to me. He said if anything happened, you were the only one who would listen." The boy's voice dropped even lower. "They're watching him constantly since Ryan died. I think they're afraid of what he knows." "What did Ryan find?" I pressed. "I don't know exactly, but he found something in the old records, in Director Stevens's office. He said it was about the others." "What others?" "The ones before Daniel. Boys who came here and changed, or disappeared." A door slammed in the background. The boy's voice became urgent. "I have to go. Room 217 after lights out. There's a blind spot in the security cameras." The line went dead. I pulled into a roadside diner to gather my thoughts. 3 years ago, my investigation had focused solely on Julia Ward's murder and Daniel's wrongful conviction. I'd seen New Dawn Academy as simply the final move in Stevens's plan to silence Daniel. I hadn't considered it might be part of something larger, something that predated the Ward case. The waitress refilled my coffee without asking, eyeing my rental car's out-of-state plates with mild curiosity. On the diner's television, the news was still covering Ryan Cooper's death, now showing aerial footage of New Dawn Academy, a sprawling complex of red brick buildings surrounded by high fences nestled against dense woodland. It looked more like a prison than a school. My phone buzzed with a text. It was Marcus. "Call me ASAP. Found something about New Dawn." I stepped outside to return his call. "Helen, you need to be careful," Marcus said immediately. "I've been digging into New Dawn's history. It was founded 15 years ago with private donations, mainly from members of Stevens's church. But get this, it's built on the site of a former juvenile work camp that was shut down in the 1980s after allegations of abuse." "What kind of abuse?" "The records are sealed, but I found newspaper archives mentioning 3 boys who died there in separate incidents, all ruled accidental or suicide." I felt a chill despite the warm spring air. "Any connection to Stevens?" "Nothing direct, but here's the weird part. I called a reporter who covered one of the deaths back then. She said the investigation was suddenly dropped, and her editor killed the follow-up story." Sound familiar? It did. Uncomfortably so. The same pattern of institutional silence that had protected Stevens after my documentary. "There's more," Marcus continued. "Ryan Cooper was at New Dawn because he set fire to his school gymnasium. Except according to his former teachers, he was terrified of fire. His mother died in a house fire when he was 8. The implications were disturbing. You think he was set up? I think New Dawn specifically recruits certain types of troubled kids. Kids without strong family. Advocates. Kids who won't be believed if they speak up." As I got back in my car, I realized I'd made a critical error 3 years ago. I'd seen Daniel's case as an isolated injustice, a murder, a cover-up, a child sacrificed to protect a respected community leader. But what if it was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of abuse and corruption stretching back decades? And what if Ryan Cooper had stumbled onto evidence of that larger pattern? I checked into a motel on the outskirts of Millfield, far from the one I'd stayed at during my previous investigation. As darkness fell, I spread my old case files across the bed and added what little we knew about Ryan Cooper. The 17-minute security gap, the mysterious text message, the boy's phone call about the others. At 11:30 p.m., my phone lit up with another text from the unknown number. "They found the origami bird. Now they're, searching everyone's rooms. Don't come tonight. He says to look for Thomas first. Thomas Ward, Daniel's uncle who had helped me 3 years ago by leaving Julia's journals for me to find. The last I'd heard, he had left the state after receiving threats. If Daniel was suggesting I find Thomas first, it meant Thomas knew something crucial about New Dawn Academy. Morning in Millfield brought a brittle sunshine that did little to warm the air. I drove slowly past New Dawn Academy, noting the increased security. 2 guards at the main gate where previously there had been one, and a police cruiser, parked near the entrance. My presence wouldn't go unnoticed for long. In a town this size, with a history this bitter, faces were remembered. I needed to find Thomas Ward quickly, before word of my return reached Eric Stevens. The last known address I had for Thomas was the small apartment he'd rented 3 years ago after his sister's murder. When I pulled up outside the shabby 2-story building, I wasn't surprised to find another family living there now. The landlady, a wary woman with nicotine-stained fingers, remembered Thomas. Left in the middle of the night about 2 years back, she said. Paid his rent through the month, though. Decent of him. Any idea where he went? She shook her head. He kept to himself. Worked at Miller's Auto for a while, might try there. Miller's Auto Shop sat on the edge of town, a concrete block building with peeling paint and a yard full of vehicles in various states of disrepair. The owner, a heavy-set man with grease-blackened hands, squinted at me suspiciously. Thomas Ward? Haven't seen him in years. Good mechanic when he was sober. He wiped his hands on a rag that had long ago lost any claim to cleanliness. You're that documentary lady, aren't you? The one who stirred everything up about the Ward boy. I nodded, watching his expression carefully. Lot of folks around here didn't appreciate that, he said, but there was no hostility in his tone. Made things uncomfortable for those of us who always had questions. About that case. You had doubts about Daniel's guilt? Let's just say I've known Eric Stevens longer than most. Known him since we were boys, in fact. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. Thomas used to get letters sometimes while he worked here. They came to the shop because he was paranoid about his apartment from up north somewhere. Maine, I think. Envelope had a lighthouse on it. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. I thanked him and turned to go. Ms. Reese, he called after me. Whatever you're looking for, be careful. This town has long memories and longer shadows. Back. At my car, I found something tucked under the windshield wiper. A small piece of paper folded into the shape of a bird. An origami crane, precisely creased and expertly crafted. My heart raced. Daniel had made these in juvenile detention, a skill he'd learned from a therapy program. I carefully unfolded the paper, trying to preserve it as evidence. Inside was a message written in a tight, controlled hand that I didn't recognize. The door opens at 3:17. 3:17. The exact time Ryan Cooper's body had been discovered, according to news reports. The exact time the security camera had resumed, working after its 17-minute failure. I looked around the parking lot but saw no one watching me. Whoever had left the message was long gone. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Called in some favors. Thomas Ward got a Maine driver's license 18 months ago. Address in Rockland. Sending. Details now. Rockland, Maine. A small coastal town known for its lighthouses. It fit with what the mechanic had told me. As I drove back toward my motel to pack for the trip north, a patrol car pulled out behind me, lights flashing. My stomach tightened as I pulled over. In my rearview mirror, I recognized Officer Brennan, one of the Millfield police officers who had been particularly hostile during my previous investigation. Ms. Reese, he said, approaching my window. Heard you were back in town. Chief would like a word. Am I being detained, Officer Brennan? Just a friendly request. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Given the recent tragedy at New Dawn Academy, the department has some concerns about outside agitation. I followed him to the police station, my mind racing. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had spotted me at Miller's Auto and reported my presence. The question was whether this was simple harassment or something more sinister. Police Chief Randall Monroe had aged since I'd last seen him. The man who had dismissed my evidence 3 years ago now had deeper lines around his mouth and less hair on his head. but his eyes still held the same calculating coldness. "Ms. Reese," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk, "what brings you back to Millfield?" "Professional interest in Ryan Cooper's death," I replied, deciding honesty was my best approach. Considering the circumstances, it seems newsworthy. The circumstances being a troubled young man taking his own life? Tragic, certainly, but hardly unusual in his demographic. Monroe leaned back in his chair. "Unless you're suggesting otherwise, I'm just gathering information at this stage. Like you were just gathering information before you accused half the town of conspiracy. In that hit piece you called a documentary?" He leaned forward. "Let me be clear, Ms. Reese. Ryan Cooper's death was thoroughly investigated. The medical examiner ruled it suicide. Case closed. And the security camera failure? Just a coincidence?" Something flickered in Monroe's eyes. Surprise. Perhaps concern that I knew about that detail. Technical glitches happen, especially in older buildings. As I left the station, the warning was clear. Millfield didn't want me digging into Ryan Cooper's death, which only convinced me that I was on the right track. Back at my motel, I found my door. Slightly ajar, though I was certain I'd locked it. I pushed it open cautiously to find the room in disarray. Drawers pulled out, mattress askew, my case files scattered across the floor. But among the chaos, centered perfectly on the pillow, sat another origami bird. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. "Thomas knows about the lighthouse, but they know you're looking for him. Drive east, not north. The answer is in room 217. Room 217, the same room mentioned in the phone call. Someone inside New Dawn Academy was communicating with me, guiding me toward what? Evidence about Ryan Cooper's death? Or something bigger that connected to Daniel Ward and whatever Thomas had discovered? As I repacked my scattered belongings, I made a decision. Maine would have to wait. Whatever answers Thomas Ward might have, the more immediate trail led to room 217 at New Dawn Academy, and I needed to get inside before whoever ransacked my room realized what the origami bird had told me. Getting inside New Dawn Academy required a cover story. Fortunately, my reputation as a documentary filmmaker, however controversial, provided the perfect pretext. I contacted several publications, pitching a story about innovative rehabilitation programs for troubled youth. By mid-afternoon, I had an assignment from a respected education journal and official permission to tour New Dawn Academy the following day. What I didn't have was a way to access room 217 without raising suspicion. For that, I needed help. From my mysterious insider, I texted the unknown number. "Tour tomorrow morning, need access to second floor." The response came hours later. "Fire drill scheduled 10:30 a.m. Security diverted. Second floor west wing, be quick." The next morning I dressed professionally in a blazer and slacks, my press credentials prominently displayed. I'd hidden a small camera in my glasses and wore a watch with audio recording capability, both legal in single-party consent states like this one. New Dawn Academy looked different in daylight, less foreboding, more institutional. The red brick buildings formed a horseshoe around a central courtyard where boys in matching Navy uniforms walked in orderly lines between classes. From a distance, it could have been any private school. Only the high fences topped with cameras suggested otherwise. At the administration building, a receptionist led me to a conference room where Eric Stevens waited. 3 years had added silver to his temples but taken nothing from his confident demeanor. His smile was practiced, professional, the same smile he'd given me during our confrontation at the end of my investigation. "Ms. Reese," he said, extending his hand. "What an unexpected pleasure." I shook his hand briefly. "Thank you for accommodating me on such short notice, Mr. Stevens." "Director Stevens, please." His smile remained fixed, though I admit I was surprised by your request. Your previous project suggested you held certain biases about our work here. "Professional journalists follow the facts regardless of personal opinions," I replied. "I'm here to learn about your rehabilitation methods. Nothing more." He studied me for a moment, clearly skeptical. "Of course. Well, we have nothing to hide at New Dawn. In fact, we're quite proud of our success rate. 87% of our graduates never reoffend. For the next hour, Stevens led me through a carefully orchestrated tour. Classrooms with attentive students, a gymnasium where boys played basketball under watchful supervision, a dining hall serving what looked like nutritious meals. Everything spotless, orderly, controlled. The boys themselves were harder to read. They answered questions politely when prompted by staff, but their responses had a rehearsed quality. Their eyes rarely met mine directly, and when they did, I caught glimpses of something beneath. The compliant exterior, wariness, perhaps fear. "We believe in structure," Stevens explained as we walked between buildings. "Many of these young men come from chaotic environments. They need boundaries to feel safe. And spiritual guidance," I noted, seeing Bible verses framed on every wall. "Faith is a powerful tool for rehabilitation," Stevens agreed, "though we respect all religious backgrounds." I checked my watch, 10:25. The fire drill would begin soon. "May I use your restroom?" I asked. Stevens directed me to a facility in the administration building, but I intentionally took a wrong turn, finding myself in a corridor that connected to the West Wing. As I waited in an alcove, the fire alarm suddenly blared through the building. Students and staff moved quickly toward designated exits. I counted to 30, then slipped into the now empty West Wing and up a stairwell to the second floor. The hallway was lined with doors, each marked with a number. I moved quickly, heart pounding, until I found room 217. The door was locked, but as I hesitated, uncertain how to proceed, I noticed it wasn't fully closed. Someone had left it ajar for me. I slipped inside and closed it behind me. Room 217 was a standard dormitory. 2 beds, 2 desks, minimal personal effects. On one wall hung a small corkboard with photos. A younger Ryan Cooper with a woman who must have been his mother. Ryan with another boy, both in New Dawn uniforms, awkwardly smiling. I had perhaps 5 minutes before the fire drill ended. I quickly searched the room, checking under mattresses, inside desk drawers, behind the small bookshelf. Nothing seemed out of place or suspicious. Then I noticed a textbook on Ryan's desk, American History Volume 2. It seemed ordinary, except for a slight bulge in the binding. I opened it to find the spine had been carefully sliced open, and something hidden inside. A small USB drive. Just as I pocketed it, the door opened. I spun around, expecting to be caught, but instead found myself face to face with a thin boy of about 15, his pale face tense with anxiety. "You need to go," he whispered urgently. "They're coming back in. That's what Ryan found. Take it." "Are you the one who's been texting me?" I asked quickly. He nodded. "I'm Ethan, Ryan's roommate. Daniel said you'd help." "Where is Daniel now?" "Isolation. They put him there after Ryan died." Ethan glanced nervously down the hall. "He said to tell you there are records going back years, names, dates. Ryan found them in the old archives when he was assigned to digitize files." The fire alarm stopped. Voices echoed from the stairwell. "Go down the service stairs at the end of the hall," Ethan instructed. "Exit through the kitchen. I was never here." He disappeared before I could ask anything else. I slipped out of room 217 and followed his directions, making my way downstairs and through the kitchen where staff were just returning to their stations. I emerged near the parking lot just as Stevens and other administrators were doing a final head count of students. I managed to rejoin the group, apologizing for getting turned around during the alarm. Stevens's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. We completed the tour with strained politeness. I asked appropriate questions about rehabilitation techniques and success metrics, all while the USB drive burned a hole in my pocket. Whatever Ryan Cooper had found, it had cost him his life, and now it was in my possession. As I drove away from New Dawn Academy, I glanced in my rearview mirror to see Stevens watching me from the front steps, phone pressed to his ear. He was calling someone, reporting my visit, perhaps giving instructions. I needed to see what was on that USB drive, but more immediately, I needed to make sure I wasn't followed back to my motel, because one thing was now abundantly clear. Whatever conspiracy I'd uncovered 3 years ago went far deeper than one murder and one wrongful conviction, and Eric Stevens would do anything to keep it buried. I didn't return to my motel. Instead, I drove 40 minutes to a neighboring town and checked into a different hotel under an Assumed name. If Stevens had people watching for me in Millfield, I needed distance and anonymity to examine what Ryan Cooper had discovered. The USB drive was small and unmarked, the type you could buy at any convenience store. I plugged it into my laptop, half expecting encryption or password. Protection. Instead, a single folder opened containing dozens of PDF files labeled by year, going back 15 years, the entire operational history of New Dawn Academy. The most recent file was named simply Evidence. I opened it first. It contained a letter written by Ryan Cooper, dated 3 days before his death. To whoever finds this, my name is Ryan Cooper. I am not mentally ill or suicidal. If you're reading this, something has happened to me, and you need to know why. While digitizing old student files, I found a pattern. Boys who questioned the system or caused problems disappeared. Official records show transfers to other facilities or returns to family, but I've cross-referenced with public records. At least 7 boys have no trace after leaving New Dawn. No school enrollments, no social security activity. The pattern goes back to the beginning, but there's something else. Before New Dawn, this property was Millfield Youth Camp. I found newspaper clippings about deaths there too. Same pattern, same explanations. Suicide. Accident. Always with missing time in the official reports. Director Stevens knows I've been looking. Yesterday he called me to his office, asked strange questions about my spiritual progress. Said I reminded him of another boy who lost his way. I think he meant Daniel Ward. I'm giving copies of everything to Ethan. If something happens to me, get this to Helen Reese. She's the only one who tried to expose the truth. 4. My hands trembled as I closed the document. Ryan had known he was in danger. He'd compiled evidence against Stevens and New Dawn Academy, understanding it might cost him his life. I spent hours examining the other files, student records, staff reports, disciplinary actions. On the surface, they seemed like ordinary institutional documentation, but patterns emerged. Boys who showed too much independence or asked too many questions were subjected to intensive spiritual counseling. Some improved their behavior dramatically afterward, becoming model students. Others were transferred out or returned to family custody with minimal documentation, and every few years a boy died. Suicide, accident, self-harm gone too far. Always with the same staff members on duty. Always with gaps in the surveillance record. The most disturbing file was labeled Treatment Protocols. It detailed methods for breaking down resistant students, isolation, sleep deprivation, guided fasting, and something called darkroom therapy that sounded disturbingly similar to the midnight room Julia Ward had used on Daniel at Stevens's encouragement. As I read, a chill settled over me. This wasn't just about Daniel Ward anymore. New Dawn Academy was systematically abusing vulnerable boys, and had been for 15 years. Some were being brainwashed into compliance. Others, those who resisted too strongly, were disappearing, and the local authorities were complicit. Each incident report was signed off by the same officials: Judge Reynolds, Police Chief Monroe, the county medical examiner, the same circle of influence that had protected Stevens after Julia Ward's murder. My phone rang, startling me. Marcus. Helen, where are you? His voice was tense. Someone broke into my apartment in LA last night. They took my laptop and the external drive with all our research. Are you okay? Yeah, I wasn't home. But it gets worse. I called your contact at the main DMV who gave us Thomas Ward's address. She says someone else requested the same information yesterday, claiming to be law enforcement. Stevens is looking for Thomas too, I said, which means Thomas knows something important. Helen, this is getting dangerous. These people have reached far beyond Millfield. I know. I glanced at my laptop screen where Ryan Cooper's letter was still open. But I have evidence now. Marcus, real evidence of systematic abuse and possibly murder. I need to find Thomas before they do. After hanging up, I copied the USB contents to an encrypted cloud account and mailed the original drive to a secure location. Whatever happened next, Ryan Cooper's discovery wouldn't be lost again. As I prepared to leave for Maine, my phone chimed with a text from Ethan's number. They know you have the files. Daniel moved to basement level, not on any official record. Find Thomas now. Basement level. A cold weight settled in my stomach as I remembered the treatment protocols document and its clinical descriptions of breaking resistant subjects. Daniel had endured 3 years at New Dawn Academy, somehow maintaining his connection to the outside world through Ethan and Ryan. But now, Ryan was dead, Ethan was being watched, and Daniel had been taken somewhere off the official records. I had to find Thomas Ward, not just for the additional evidence he might have, but because he might be the only person who could help me get Daniel out of that place before he became another suicide in New Dawn Academy's shadowy history. The drive to Rockland, Maine would take nearly 6 hours. Before leaving, I needed to understand the power structure that had protected New Dawn Academy for so long. If Stevens had connections extending beyond Millfield, I needed to know who might be watching for me. I called an old colleague at the State Attorney General's office. "Jessica, I need information on William Hayes." Hayes had been the prosecutor who put Daniel behind bars 3 years ago. Last I'd heard, he was running for State Attorney General. Hayes lost the election last year, Jessica told me, but landed on his feet. He's district attorney for 3 counties now, including Millfield. Why? What about his replacement at the Millfield prosecutor's office? That would be Andrew Moretti. Young guy, rose through the ranks quickly. Used to be Hayes' assistant prosecutor. I thanked her and hung up, pieces falling into place. Hayes' political ambitions might have stalled, but his influence hadn't diminished. Now he oversaw prosecution for a wider region, with his former assistant handling Millfield's cases. I decided to make one stop before leaving town. The First Community Church of Millfield, where Eric Stevens served as an elder, stood on a hill, overlooking the town. A white clapboard building with a tall steeple, quintessential small-town Americana. The church had been central to my earlier investigation, a hub of influence in local politics and community affairs. The parking lot was empty on a weekday morning except for one car, a black SUV, with government plates. I parked down the street and approached cautiously, using my phone to snap pictures from a distance. Through the church's front windows, I could make out 2 men in conversation, Pastor Michael Morrison and Andrew Moretti, the new county prosecutor. Their body language suggested familiarity, comfort, not a chance meeting but a regular occurrence. As I watched, Moretti handed Morrison a manila envelope. The pastor nodded, tucking it inside his jacket. Money? Documents? I couldn't tell from my vantage point, but the exchange was clearly meant to be private. A piece of Ryan's evidence suddenly made sense. In the files I'd examined last night, there had been references to church funding for New Dawn Academy, substantial donations marked for youth rehabilitation ministry. The church had been the academy's primary financial supporter from the beginning. I was so focused on the men that I didn't notice someone approaching until a hand touched my shoulder. "Can I help you?" a woman's voice asked. I turned to find an elderly lady with kind eyes and a questioning smile. "I was just admiring the church architecture," I improvised. "It's beautiful, isn't it? Over 100 years old." Her smile turned knowing. "Though I suspect you're more interested in who's inside. You're that filmmaker, aren't you? The one who made the documentary about the Ward boy." I hesitated, then nodded. "I'm Margaret Winters," she said. "I taught piano to Julia Ward for 10 years. Watch Daniel grow up." She glanced toward the church. "Not everyone in Millfield believes the official story, Ms. Reese." "What do you know about Pastor Morrison's connection to New Dawn Academy?" I asked cautiously. "Morrison came to Millfield 17 years ago. Before that, he ran a youth ministry in Colorado that was shut down after allegations of improper discipline. Eric Stevens arrived a year later, became an elder almost immediately. Together they raised the money to open New Dawn." She lowered her voice. "My grandson was one of the first boys sent there. When he came home, after 6 months he wasn't the same. Wouldn't talk about what happened. A month later he took his own life." My heart sank. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Winters. They said he had depression that wasn't properly treated. But my grandson was never depressed before New Dawn." Her eyes hardened. "Pastor Morrison visited us after the funeral. said Tommy was unable to overcome his sinful nature. Those exact words. Why are you telling me this? Because boys are still dying, Ms. Reese, and no one in authority here will stop it. As I drove north toward Maine, Margaret Winter's words echoed in my mind. The conspiracy protecting Eric Stevens wasn't just a few corrupt officials. It was a system built around the church's influence, extending into every aspect of Millfield's power structure. I called Marcus from the road. I need you to research Pastor Michael Morrison, previous employment in Sites, Colorado, specifically any youth ministry that closed under controversial circumstances. Already on it, Marcus replied. And Helen, Thomas Ward just used his credit card at a gas station in Portland, Maine. He's on the move. Whatever Thomas knew had kept him running for 3 years. And now, with Ryan Cooper dead and Daniel hidden in New Dawn's basement, he might be the only hope for breaking open the conspiracy that had claimed so many young lives. As I crossed the state line into Maine, my phone pinged with a message from an unknown number, not Ethan's. The text contained only a photo. An origami bird sitting on what looked like a medical cart. In the background, a concrete wall with a sign, "Restricted Area, Authorized Personnel Only." Someone was sending me proof that Daniel was being held in New Dawn's restricted area, likely the basement level Ethan had mentioned. The implication was clear. Time was running out. Thomas Ward wasn't at the address listed on his driver's license. The small apartment above a hardware store in Rockland showed signs of hasty departure. Unwashed dishes in the sink, mail piled on the counter, closet doors left open with empty hangers. He left 3 days ago, the landlord told me. Paid in cash through the end of the month, said he had family business. 3 days ago, right around when Ryan Cooper died. The timing couldn't be coincidental. I searched the apartment carefully, looking for any clue to Thomas's whereabouts or what he might know about New Dawn Academy. Under the mattress, I found a sealed envelope addressed to Helen Reese, if found. Inside was a key and a note. Storage Unit 427. Coastal Self-Storage, Route 1. 30 minutes later, I stood before a roll-up metal door with the number 427 stenciled on it. The key fit perfectly. I raised the door to reveal a small space containing only a plastic storage tub and a folding table with a battery-powered lamp. The tub held what appeared to be Thomas Ward's personal archive: files, notebooks, photographs, newspaper clippings. 3 years of investigation into New Dawn Academy and Eric Stevens, meticulously organized and annotated. I set up the folding table and began reviewing the materials. Thomas had been more thorough than I'd imagined, compiling financial records, property deeds, incorporation documents, and church minutes dating back to New Dawn's founding. He'd created a flowchart showing connections between the academy, First Community Church, local officials, and a complex network of shell companies and trusts. But the most disturbing items were in a folder labeled Victims, photographs and newspaper clippings about 14 boys who had attended either New Dawn Academy or its predecessor, Millfield Youth Camp. 7 had officially committed suicide. 4 had died in accidents. 3 had simply disappeared, listed as runaways. A separate folder contained photocopies of financial transfers, substantial sums moving from church, accounts to offshore banks, then back to personal accounts belonging to Pastor Morrison, Eric Stevens, Judge Reynolds, and others in their circle. Money laundering, carefully disguised as charitable donations. My hands trembled as I understood what Thomas had uncovered. Not just abuse and occasionally murder, but a systematic criminal enterprise operating under the guise of youth rehabilitation. New Dawn wasn't just cruel, it was profitable. Buried beneath the financial documents, I found a stack of letters bound with twine. They were addressed to Thomas from Daniel, smuggled out of New Dawn Academy over the past 3 years through a network of sympathetic kitchen staff and maintenance workers. I began reading, my heart breaking at Daniel's careful, measured descriptions of life inside the academy. He wrote about treatment sessions, where resistant boys were isolated and broken down psychologically, about staff members who took particular pleasure in administering punishment, about security cameras that routinely malfunctioned during these sessions. The most recent letter, dated just 2 weeks ago, contained a warning. Uncle Thomas, something's happening. Ryan found old files in the basement archive, records from before New Dawn, when this place was still Millfield Youth Camp. He says there's proof that Stevens and Morrison were involved even then, when the first boys died. They're watching him now. They check his room when he's in class, monitor his calls. I've told him to be careful, but he's determined to get the evidence out. I'm worried they'll do to him what they threatened to do to me if I ever told what I saw the night Mom died. The basement is where they take boys who know too much. No one comes back the same. Some don't come back at all. If anything happens to Ryan, get word to Helen Reese. She's the only one who ever believed me. I sat back, overwhelmed by the scope of what I'd discovered. Thomas Ward hadn't just been hiding for 3 years. He'd been building a case, gathering evidence that could bring down not just Eric Stevens, but an entire corrupt system that had operated for decades. But where was Thomas now? And why had he abandoned his carefully compiled evidence just when Ryan Cooper's death had created a new opportunity to expose the truth? As I began repacking the materials, planning to take everything with me, I noticed something I'd overlooked. A small digital voice recorder tucked inside the lid of the storage tub. I pressed play, and Thomas Ward's voice filled the small space. Helen, if you're hearing this, then you found my research. I've gone back to Millfield. Daniel's last letter convinced me I can't keep hiding while more boys die. Ryan Cooper's death was the final straw. I have a contact inside New Dawn, someone who's been helping Daniel. They've agreed to get me access to the restricted area in the basement, the place they call the Midnight Room. I'm going to document everything, then take it straight to the FBI field office in Portland. If I don't make it, everything you need is in this storage unit. The financial records are the key. Follow the money through the shell companies. That's how they've kept people silent all these years. Bribes disguised as investments, blackmail disguised as spiritual counseling. Be careful. They have people everywhere. Trust no one in Millfield except Margaret Winters. She lost a grandson to them. She's been my eyes and ears in town. I'm sorry I didn't do more 3 years ago. I was a coward. I won't be a coward anymore. The recording ended with the date and time. 2 days ago, 10:17 p.m., Thomas Ward had returned to Millfield to infiltrate New Dawn Academy, planning to gather final evidence from the restricted basement area, the same area where Daniel was now being held, and he hadn't been heard from since. I packed everything from Thomas's storage unit into my rental car: financial records, victim files, Daniel's letters, and the voice recorder. This evidence was too valuable to leave behind, especially with Thomas potentially compromised. Before leaving, I photographed each document with my phone, uploading the images to a secure cloud folder shared with Marcus. If anything happened to the physical evidence or to me, the information would survive. The drive back to Millfield took on new urgency. Thomas Ward had gone there intending to infiltrate New Dawn Academy 2 days ago. Given the timing and what I now knew about the basement facility, I feared the worst. Had Thomas been caught? Was he being held alongside Daniel? Or had something more permanent been done to silence him? Halfway back to Millfield, my phone rang. Marcus. Helen, I've been researching Pastor Morrison like you asked. The youth ministry in Colorado was called Shepherd's Path. It was shut down in 2007 after allegations of physical and psychological abuse. Was Stevens involved? Not officially, but there are newspaper quotes from former staff describing a spiritual counselor who designed the discipline program. The description matches Stevens. Any deaths? 2 suicides and 1 drowning ruled accidental, all within a 3-year period. The pattern was clear. Morrison and Stevens had been perfecting their methods long before New Dawn Academy. When scandal threatened in Colorado, they simply moved east and started over, using the church in Millfield as their new base of operations. There's more, Marcus continued. I found financial connections between Morrison, Stevens, and a company called Redemption Counseling Services. It received nearly $2 million in state contracts for juvenile rehabilitation over the past decade. Let me guess, the money went to New Dawn. Some of it. The rest was dispersed through a network of shell companies. Classic money laundering scheme. This matched the financial documents Thomas had collected. New Dawn wasn't just about control or religious extremism. It was a profitable enterprise siphoning government funds meant for rehabilitation into private pockets. Any sign of Thomas Ward? I asked. Nothing concrete, but there's been police activity around New Dawn this morning. Scanner traffic mentioned a security breach last night. My stomach tightened. If Thomas had been caught trying to infiltrate the facility, he could be in serious danger. I arrived back in Millfield after nightfall and checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, paying cash under a false name. I needed to establish a secure base of operations before making my next move. In my room, I spread Thomas's evidence across the bed, focusing on the most recent financial records. His meticulous work had traced money flowing from state agencies to New Dawn through various intermediaries, then to offshore accounts, and finally back to personal accounts belonging to Stevens, Morrison, and their associates. The amounts were substantial, hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. This wasn't just about power or control. It was organized crime disguised as youth rehabilitation, with vulnerable boys as both victims and unwitting cover for the scheme. I took photos of the key financial documents and composed an email to contacts at the FBI, State Attorney General's office, and 3 trusted journalists. My finger hovered over the send button, then stopped. Thomas had planned to take similar evidence to authorities 2 days ago. Now he was missing, possibly being held in the same facility as Daniel. If I sent this evidence now, would it trigger a panicked response from Stevens and his allies? Would Daniel and Thomas be eliminated to remove the final witnesses? I needed more information before making my move. I needed to know if Thomas was alive, and exactly where in the facility Daniel was being held. I called the number Ethan had been using to contact me. No answer. I texted, "Need to know if Thomas Ward is in the facility." Hours passed with no response. I reviewed more of Thomas's files, mapping out New Dawn's physical layout based on property records and building permits. The facility had been renovated several times, with the most recent modification adding a sub-level therapeutic space that didn't appear on public floor plans. Just after midnight, my phone chimed. A text from Ethan's number. "Thomas caught 2 nights ago. Basement level with Daniel. They took my phone, using nurses. Security increased. FBI called today asking questions. Stevens destroying records." My heart raced. The FBI was already investigating, likely due to Thomas's contact there. But Stevens was now destroying evidence, which meant time was running out. I texted, "Guru, how can I get in?" The response came minutes later. "Don't try, too dangerous. Stevens knows you're back. They're watching for you." Then a second message, with an attached image. "Records being moved tomorrow night. Truck leaves 2 a.m., staff entrance." The image showed a loading dock at the rear of New Dawn's main building. A potential way in if I could time it right. As I considered my options, a final text came through. "They call it the Midnight Room, where the door closes forever." The same phrase that had haunted Daniel for years. The door closes at midnight. Now it had new, more sinister meaning. Not just a closet where Julia Ward had locked her son for spiritual cleansing, but an actual facility where boys who knew too much disappeared permanently. I needed to act quickly. Thomas and Daniel were alive but in imminent danger. Evidence was being destroyed. And somewhere, beneath New Dawn Academy, a room existed where the most damning secrets of Stevens and Morrison's operation were hidden. Secrets worth killing to protect. I had less than 24 hours to find a way in. Dawn broke over Millfield with a pale, uncertain light. I'd spent the night reviewing Thomas's files and formulating a plan. If Stevens was destroying evidence ahead of a potential FBI investigation, I needed to ensure the most critical information survived, both Thomas's financial records and whatever was being moved out of New Dawn tonight. I couldn't do it alone. My first call was to Marcus. "I need you to contact the FBI agent Thomas was working with in Portland. No details over the phone, just tell them to expect a large digital file upload in the next 12 hours. "What are you planning, Helen? Better you don't know yet. But make backup copies of everything I sent you. Multiple locations. Next, I called Margaret Winters, the piano teacher who had lost her grandson to New Dawn. "Mrs. Winters, I need your help. It's about New Dawn Academy." "I've been expecting your call," she said, her voice steady despite the early hour. "Thomas told me you might contact me if something went wrong." We agreed to meet at her home, a small Victorian cottage on a quiet street near Millfield Center. Inside, the house was filled with books, plants, and photographs, a warm, lived-in space that contrasted sharply with the sterile environment of New Dawn. "Thomas came to see me 3 days ago," Margaret told me, serving tea in delicate cups. "He was different, determined, focused. He said he finally had enough evidence to shut down New Dawn for good." "Do you know how he planned to get inside the facility?" She nodded. "Through me. I still teach piano to Pastor Morrison's daughter. I've been inside the church offices many times, seen things I wasn't meant to see. I gave Thomas a key card that Morrison once left at my house. The security breach they reported, that was Thomas?" "Yes. He got in through a service entrance, but something went wrong. He was supposed to contact me afterward." She set down her cup. "When I heard nothing, I called my friend who works in the kitchen at New Dawn. She confirmed they caught an intruder 2 nights ago, but no arrest was reported to police. This confirmed my worst fears. Thomas had been captured and was being held secretly within the facility, alongside Daniel. There's more," Margaret continued. "My friend overheard Stevens ordering staff to prepare for a special transport tonight. 2 patients being moved to what they called the satellite facility. Daniel and Thomas," I said, certain now that they planned to remove the most problematic witnesses before investigators could reach them. Margaret opened a drawer and removed a small envelope. "Thomas left this with me, in case he didn't come back. He said it was insurance." Inside was a USB drive similar to the one Ryan Cooper had hidden. I plugged it into my laptop to find a single video file. Thomas sitting in the same storage unit I'd visited yesterday, speaking directly to the camera. "This is my testimony regarding New Dawn Academy and the criminal enterprise operated by Eric Stevens and Michael Morrison. If you're seeing this, I've likely been detained or killed." For 30 minutes, Thomas methodically detailed everything he'd uncovered: financial fraud, psychological abuse, suspicious deaths, and the network of influential people protecting the operation. He named names: judges, police officers, state officials, all receiving payments through the elaborate money laundering scheme. Most disturbingly, he described what he called the final solution, a protocol for permanently silencing boys who discovered too much about New Dawn's operations. "They make it look like suicide or an accident," Thomas explained. "They've perfected the method over years, first at Shepherd's Path in Colorado, then at Millfield Youth Camp, and now at New Dawn. They select vulnerable boys without strong family advocates, gradually isolate them, then eliminate them if they become threats. The bodies are cremated quickly, with falsified medical examiner reports, perfect crimes hidden in plain sight." The video ended with Thomas's direct address to authorities: "I am not suicidal. I am not accident-prone. If something happens to me, it will be murder, orchestrated by Eric Stevens and his associates to protect their criminal enterprise." Margaret watched my face as the video ended. "Now you understand why Thomas was so careful all these years, why he kept running. I need to get into New Dawn tonight," I said, "before they move Daniel and Thomas to this satellite facility." She nodded slowly. "I still have another key card, but getting in is only part of the problem. The basement level requires special access. I'll worry about that when I'm inside. What I need now is evidence that will stand up in court, proof of what's happening in that facility, proof that Thomas and Daniel are being held illegally. And if you're caught..." I thought of the 14 boys in Thomas's victims folder, of Ryan Cooper, silenced when he discovered the truth, of Daniel, enduring 3 years of captivity after witnessing his mother's murder. If I don't try, 2 more people will disappear tonight, and Stevens will simply start over, somewhere else, with new victims. As I left Margaret's house with the key card and Thomas's video testimony, my phone chimed with a message from an unknown number, not Ethan's. "Stevens and Morrison in emergency meeting. FBI called administrators with questions about financial records. Transport. Moved up to 11 p.m. tonight. Security increased on basement level. Bringing in private contractors. Be careful. Someone else inside New Dawn was helping now. Perhaps the nurse whose phone Ethan had borrowed. Perhaps another staff member who had finally seen too much. The circle of potential allies was growing, but so were the risks. With less than 15 hours until Daniel and Thomas would be moved, I needed to finalize my plan and prepare for what might be my only chance to infiltrate New Dawn Academy's most restricted area, the place they called the Midnight Room. Throughout the day, I prepared. Methodically, I uploaded Thomas's video testimony and financial documents to secure servers, scheduled for automatic release to authorities and media outlets if I didn't enter a cancellation code within 24 hours. I purchased basic disguise materials, a maintenance uniform from a supply store, AEI, blonde wig and glasses with non-prescription lenses. I studied building plans of New Dawn Academy that Thomas had obtained, focusing on the service corridors and emergency exits. But one crucial element was missing. I needed to know exactly where in the basement Daniel and Thomas were being held. The facility was large, with multiple secured areas. Searching blindly would waste precious time. For that information, I needed someone who had recently been inside New Dawn, someone who knew its current security protocols, and the layout of the restricted basement level. Marcus called with a possible lead. I've been researching Ryan Cooper's background like you asked. His former teacher at Millfield High might be helpful. Kate Brennan. She visited Ryan at New Dawn several times. Apparently, she was the only person from his past who maintained contact. I found Kate Brennan in her classroom after school hours grading papers. She was younger than I expected, perhaps 30, with a determined expression that softened when I introduced myself. Helen Reese, she said, recognition flashing in her eyes. I thought your documentary was brave. Not many people in Millfield would say that out loud. I explained that I was investigating Ryan's death, watching carefully for her reaction. She closed the classroom door before responding. Ryan wasn't suicidal, she said firmly. I saw him 3 days before his death. He was excited, focused, said he'd discovered something important that would help his friend Daniel. Daniel Ward. She nodded. Ryan was fascinated by Daniel's case after watching your documentary, when he was sent to New Dawn for the arson incident, which I never believed he committed, by the way. Meeting Daniel became an obsession for him. Did Ryan tell what he'd found? Not specifically, just that it involved old records and what he called the pattern. He was planning to share everything with me on my next visit. She swallowed hard, which never happened. Did you ever see the basement level during your visits? Kate hesitated, then reached for her phone, scrolling to find something. Ryan sent me this a week before he died, said it was for insurance. It was a crude map of New Dawn's basement, drawn from memory. Several rooms were labeled, including one marked Midnight at the far end of a corridor. Ryan worked in the records room. As part of his therapy assignment, Kate explained, he had limited access to the basement level. This was as much as he could map out without raising suspicion. Do you know about the security systems? Key card access at the main elevator. Separate key for the restricted section. She pointed to the map. Guards posted here and here. Cameras throughout except, she indicated a maintenance corridor. This service area has blind spots. Ryan said the cameras there malfunction regularly due to humidity from the nearby boiler room. This was exactly the information I needed. Ryan Cooper had been methodically documenting New Dawn's security weaknesses, planning his own evidence-gathering mission before he was caught and silenced. There's something else, Kate said, her voice dropping. After Ryan died, I received a package at school. Inside was a recorder pen, the kind that looks like a normal pen but records audio. Ryan had hidden it in his room. It contained conversations between Stevens and another man, discussing what they called the procedure for handling non-responsive subjects. Do you still have it? No. 2 men claiming to be police took it, but I made a copy first. She handed me a small flash drive. I've been afraid to do anything with it. These people have so much power in Millfield. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The recording was muffled, but clear enough to recognize Eric Stevens' voice. "The new protocol requires sedation before transport. We can't risk another incident like Ward. The satellite facility is prepared for 2 arrivals. Once they're processed, all records here will be sanitized." Another voice, presumably Pastor Morrison. "What about the Cooper situation?" The teacher is still asking questions. "Being handled. The official report is complete. Suicide, case closed. If she persists, we have options." The recording continued, detailing their plans to remove evidence from New Dawn and transfer problematic subjects to another location. They spoke clinically, discussing human beings as if they were inventory to be managed. They were already planning to move Daniel before Ryan died. I realized. Ryan's discovery just accelerated their timeline. And now they're talking about me, Kate added grimly. "I've received warnings. My car was vandalized last week, a brick through my window the week before. You should leave town," I told her. "Just for a few days, until this is resolved. I can't abandon my students, and I won't let them intimidate me into silence." Her expression hardened. Ryan trusted me with this information. I owe it to him to see this through. I left Kate's classroom with the map, the recording, and a new ally in Millfield. Her courage was inspiring and concerning. Stevens and his associates had already demonstrated their willingness to eliminate threats. Kate Brennan had placed herself directly in their crosshairs by helping me. As dusk fell over Millfield, I made my final preparations. The disguise was ready. Margaret's keycard would get me into the main facility. Kate's map would guide me to the basement level. I had cameras hidden in my clothing and the recorder pen to document whatever I found. My phone buzzed with another message from the unknown helper inside. "New Dawn. Transport team arrived early. 2 sedation orders issued for 9 p.m. They're moving up the timeline again. You need to hurry." The window was closing faster than I'd anticipated. Instead of midnight, Daniel and Thomas would be moved in just 3 hours. Once they reached the satellite facility, wherever that was, finding them again might be impossible. I had no choice but to accelerate my own plan, even if it meant entering New Dawn Academy less prepared than I'd hoped. The lives of 2 people depended on it, and possibly many more, if Stevens and Morrison were allowed to continue their operation. As I drove toward New Dawn, a final text came through from Marcus. "FBI moving too slowly. Waiting for warrants. Won't arrive until morning at earliest. You're on your own tonight. Be careful." Whatever happened in the next few hours, I would have no official backup. Just the evidence I'd gathered, the allies I'd made, and whatever I could document inside the facility's most restricted area, the midnight room where the worst secrets of New Dawn Academy were hidden. New Dawn's service entrance was surprisingly easy to access with Margaret's keycard. Dressed in maintenance coveralls with my hair tucked under the blonde wig, I blended with the evening shift workers. The basement access required more creativity. I followed a guard carrying meal trays, slipping through the door before it locked. The lower level was clinical and cold. Concrete walls painted institutional green. Following Ryan's map, I navigated through dimly lit corridors, heart pounding with each step. Security was lighter than expected. Stevens had diverted personnel to prepare for the transport. Finally, I reached a door marked simply M, the midnight room. Through a small window, I saw them, Thomas and Daniel, sedated but conscious, strapped to gurneys. When Daniel's eyes met mine, recognition flashed despite the disguise. I had found them. Now, I had to get them out. The guard's key card, borrowed during a calculated collision in the hallway, opened the midnight room door. Inside, medical equipment and restraint systems lined the walls, tools designed for rehabilitation that looked more like instruments of torture. "Helen," Thomas's voice was slurred from sedation. "How did you—" "No time," I whispered, activating the hidden cameras in my clothing. "Transport team is coming. We have minutes, not hours." I quickly documented the room, photographing restraints, medication charts, and the logbook revealing a pattern of procedures performed on resistant subjects. Each entry was initialed by Stevens or Morrison. As I released their restraints, Alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Someone had discovered the unconscious guard I'd left in the supply closet. We needed a new escape plan. And fast. "This way," Daniel whispered, surprisingly steady despite the sedatives. "Maintenance tunnel. Ryan showed me before." He led us to what appeared to be a storage closet. Behind shelving units, a small door opened to a narrow passage, a remnant from when the building had been Millfield Youth Camp. As we navigated the dark tunnel, Thomas explained through labored breaths. "Stevens, destroying evidence tonight, transferring boys who know too much to the satellite facility, the old hunting lodge," Daniel added, "where no one can hear." The tunnel ended at a storm drain near the perimeter fence. Freedom seemed within reach until headlights swept across the grounds. The transport team had arrived early, and somehow they knew exactly where to find us. The transport team cornered us near the fence, 3 men in tactical gear, armed and moving with military precision. Not typical security guards, but professionals brought in for this specific job. "Stevens said you'd come," their leader called out. "Said you couldn't resist playing. Hero again." As they advanced, floodlights suddenly illuminated the area, not from New Dawn, but from beyond the fence. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "FBI, drop your weapons." Agent Calloway, Thomas's FBI contact, had arrived ahead of schedule with a tactical team of her own. The transport team hesitated, then surrendered. But inside New Dawn, emergency protocols had activated. Through windows, we could see staff frantically moving through corridors, carrying boxes and hard drives. Stevens was executing his contingency plan, destroying evidence before law enforcement could secure the facility. We had to move quickly to preserve what remained. The FBI raid on New Dawn Academy revealed horrors beyond even what I had suspected. 27 boys were immediately removed from the facility, many showing signs of psychological trauma and medical sedation. In the basement's restricted area, agents discovered the complete archive Ryan Cooper had died protecting, records dating back to Millfield Youth Camp, detailing decades of abuse disguised as therapy. Eric Stevens escaped during the chaos, but Pastor Morrison was arrested along with 12 staff members. The financial evidence. Thomas had compiled led investigators to frozen accounts across 3 countries. Judge Reynolds suffered a fatal heart attack as agents arrived at his home with a warrant. 3 weeks later, I sat across from Daniel in a secure facility where he was recovering, no longer the frightened 12-year-old from my documentary. He was now 15, with eyes that had seen too much but still held remarkable strength. "What happens now?" I asked him. "I testify," he said simply. "For Ryan, for all of them." As I prepared to leave, he handed me one final origami bird. Inside was written not a warning or a clue, but a simple message of gratitude. "The door closed at midnight, but you opened it again. Stevens remains at large, possibly protected by the network of influence he built over decades. The investigation continues to uncover connections to similar facilities across the country. This story isn't over. It's only beginning. The Midnight Room exists in many forms in many places, but as Daniel taught us, even the darkest rooms cannot hold those determined to find the light.